As a child, I read about men and women who stood against injustice, marched when it was dangerous, and spoke when the world tried to silence them. Dr. King taught me to dream. Rosa Parks showed me the power of one act. Malcolm X made me see the strength in self-respect. Medgar Evers taught me what real courage was all about. As a child of the 1970s, they were my teachers outside of school. I studied their stories and learned from their victories and hard-fought defeats. The power of protest had lit a fire in me. One of the major tools at their disposal was the boycott. What a mighty sword to have, the power of the purse. It got me thinking about how those heroes and heroines handle the issue of protest today. Several major U.S. companies have recently scaled back or eliminated their diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) initiatives, leading to public backlash and calls for boycotts from civil rights activists and consumers. Due to legal, political, and financial pressures, these firms have scaled back or eliminated their diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) programs. Due to the retreat from these policies, many consumers and civil rights advocates have called for a boycott from some of America's biggest companies. Disney, Target, Google. We have all seen their names attached to calls for consumer boycotts. Indeed, this has been a hotbed issue for the last couple of months and beyond. What is DEI? DEI stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. It is a framework organizations use to create fair and inclusive environments that value differences and ensure equal opportunities for all individuals. Here's what each component means. Diversity, the presence of differences within a group, including race, ethnicity, gender, age, sexual orientation, disability, socioeconomic background, and more. Equity, ensuring fair treatment, access, and opportunities for all while addressing systemic barriers that prevent full participation. Inclusion, creating a culture where all individuals feel welcomed, respected, and valued, allowing them to contribute and thrive. DEI initiatives are often implemented in workplaces, education, and communities to promote fairness, reduce discrimination, and foster innovation through diverse perspectives. Diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) has evolved over decades, influenced by civil rights movements, legal changes, and corporate policies. Without going through nearly 70 years of American history, let it suffice to say that as America transitioned from corporate structures that were almost always white and male, there needed to be some way to catalog and enforce new rules, laws, and social norms. In effect, DEI was the structure in which categories and enforcement happened. Whether it was the inclusion of African Americans, fostering a more hospitable work environment for women, or learning people's pronouns as the LGBTQ community's rights were brought to the forefront, DEI was the framework in which America understood diversity. In its most recent iteration, DEI has helped us understand the following. Corporate DEI initiatives. Companies recognize the business case for diversity, linking it to innovation, customer satisfaction, and market competitiveness. Focus on inclusion. Instead of hiring diverse talent, organizations started creating inclusive cultures where diverse employees could thrive. Intersectionality introduced, 1989. Kimberlé Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality, highlighting how overlapping identities, e.g., race plus gender, shape experiences of discrimination. Many companies, including Disney, Google, and Target, are dismantling their policies and programs around DEI, and their reasons for doing so are not all the same or even related. Here are some of the reasons given for many of the biggest companies in the country and beyond. 1. Legal and regulatory challenges. The U.S. Supreme Court's ruling against affirmative action in college admissions has influenced corporate DEI programs. Many fear similar legal challenges in the workplace. Lawsuits alleging reverse discrimination, favoring minority groups at the expense of others, have increased, with some high-profile cases leading to settlements or policy reversals. 2. Political and cultural backlash. Conservative political movements have opposed DEI initiatives, arguing they promote woke corporate policies and identity-based decision-making. Some state governments, e.g., Florida and Texas, have introduced laws restricting DEI programs, particularly in publicly funded institutions. 3. Economic and business considerations. During economic downturns or cost-cutting periods, DEI programs are often seen as non-essential expenses, leading to layoffs in DEI departments. Some companies are shifting focus to broader, merit-based hiring instead of targeted DEI efforts to avoid controversy. 4th, investor and shareholder pressure. Some activist investors and corporate stakeholders argue that DEI initiatives don't contribute to profitability and may alienate specific customer segments. Companies facing board pressure, like Disney and Meta, have prioritized restructuring and cost-cutting over diversity initiatives. Tool shed. Sometimes we must take a stand. For many, the canceling of DEI initiatives is one such instance. As with every confrontation in life, one must ask oneself what the desired outcome of the altercation is and how one can best attain that outcome. For many in the fight for DEI and its ideals, the result is social change, and the weapon or tool of choice is the tried and true consumer protest, the boycott. Because this tool has been used so many times throughout history with varying degrees of success, the boycott feels familiar and comforting. We should look at the boycott and its effectiveness in modern America. Most effective boycotts of the civil rights era. During the civil rights movement, 1950s to 1960s, boycotts were among the most powerful tools to challenge segregation and racial discrimination. Montgomery bus boycott, 1955 to 1956, the blueprint for success. Ms. Rosa Parks' arrest for refusing to give up her seat to a white passenger, leading to African Americans in Montgomery, Alabama, refused to ride city buses for 381 days, crippling the bus system financially. The boycott eventually led to the Supreme Court ruling, Browder v. Gale, that segregation on public buses was unconstitutional. The boycott elevated Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as a national civil rights leader and civic icon. Tallahassee bus boycott, 1956 to 1958, inspired by Montgomery. 2 black students were arrested for sitting in the whites-only section of a bus. The black community boycotted the city bus system and set up carpool networks. Inspired by the Montgomery boycott, the result was just as hard-hitting. Laws were passed, and civil rights in America were nudged ever closer to equality. The Greensboro sit-ins, 1960, boycotting by occupation. Black college students refused to leave a segregated Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. Sit-ins quickly spread to other cities, forcing businesses to respond. Over 70,000 students participated across the South. By July 1960, Woolworths desegregated its lunch counters. The sit led to forming the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, the Birmingham Boycott and Protests, 1963, economic pressure on segregation. Birmingham, Alabama was one of the most segregated cities in the U.S. Black residents boycotted downtown businesses while activists led protests. Businesses lost millions in revenue due to the boycott. Increased media attention, primarily after police used fire hoses and dogs on children, led to Birmingham desegregating public spaces and boosted support for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Legacy and evolution of civil rights boycotts. Early civil rights boycotts were highly effective due to the direct economic pressure they applied in localized contexts. Globalization and corporate structures have made traditional boycotts less effective in the modern era. Activism has evolved into divestment, shareholder activism, and legislative advocacy as more impactful tools. While boycotts remain a tool for activism, their success now often depends on coordinated efforts with policy change, legal action, and systemic reform rather than just consumer behavior alone. These boycotts reshaped American society, proving that economic resistance could dismantle segregation and discrimination. Right tool for the job? Our nation is better off for the brave men and women who sacrificed and put their lives on the line to win these hard-fought victories. However, boycotting in today's society looks very different, as businesses are not typically local or regional. Boycotts have historically been practical tools for social and political change, but their viability has diminished in the modern era for several reasons. Market fragmentation and globalization. Companies are no longer solely dependent on a single market or region. If one demographic boycotts a company, it can shift its focus to other markets, reducing the financial impact. Many corporations are part of complex global supply chains, making it difficult to isolate and target a specific company without affecting unrelated businesses. 2. Corporate diversification. Large corporations own multiple brands across different industries. Consumers may unknowingly continue supporting a parent company even while boycotting one of its subsidiaries. Example: a boycott against a single brand owned by a conglomerate like Procter & Gamble, Nestlé, or Unilever has minimal impact unless all their products are avoided. 3. Short attention spans and social media cycles. Modern protests often rely on viral outrage, but public attention moves quickly. Today's trending boycott may be forgotten within weeks or even days. Social media can create the illusion of widespread participation, but real economic impact often falls short. 4. Consumer convenience and brand loyalty. Many consumers prioritize convenience, cost, or quality over activism. Even if a boycott starts strong, many find it difficult to sustain, mainly when alternatives are limited or less accessible. 5. Corporate adaptation and public relations. Companies have become skilled at crisis management, offering apologies, rebranding, or making surface-level policy changes to mitigate backlash without fundamentally altering their practices. Example: brands engage in woke-washing or greenwashing to appease critics while continuing questionable practices. 6. Influence of institutional investors. Large investment firms like BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street heavily own many corporations. When these firms hold long-term stakes, a consumer boycott rarely significantly affects stock prices. 7. Legislation and lobbying power. Corporations influence government policies through lobbying, often neutralizing the effects of public boycotts through legal and financial means. Example: companies facing regulatory threats often negotiate with governments rather than relying on consumer sentiment. So let's take a look at some modern boycotts and how effective they have been, and some of the results. 1. Nike and Colin Kaepernick controversy, 2018. Nike featured ex-NFL player Colin Kaepernick in an ad campaign after he knelt during the national anthem to protest police brutality. Some conservatives burned Nike gear and called for a boycott. Nike's sales increased by 31% in the days following the campaign. The controversy boosted brand loyalty among younger, progressive consumers. Nike stock hit an all-time high, proving that boycotts can backfire if the company gains more substantial support from another demographic. 2. Bud Light boycott, 2023. Bud Light partnered with transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney, sparking backlash from conservative consumers. Right-wing activists called for a mass boycott, and some retailers saw a decline in Bud Light sales. Sales plummeted by over 20%, causing Bud Light to lose its spot as the number one. One beer in America. Parent company Anheuser-Busch faced a $5 billion drop in market value. However, Bud Light remains dominant, and its long-term financial impact is uncertain. 3. Facebook/Meta advertising boycott, numbers stop hate for profit. 2020. Facebook was accused of spreading hate speech and misinformation during the U.S. elections and Black Lives Matter protests. Over 1,000 companies, including Coca-Cola, Unilever, and Verizon, pulled advertising from Facebook. Facebook stock dropped temporarily. Facebook pledged to improve its content moderation policies. Long-term effects. As with any tool, the effects must be measured by the deployed environment and the user's intended results. In our 3 examples above, it's safe to say the desired result was a precipitous drop in sales or users, forcing the company to make long-term policy changes. The results are apparent in one instance, Nike, and muddled at best for the other 2. Nike's sales increased 31% in a very short-lived brand revival. Today, Nike faces many headwinds, mainly unrelated to its political stances. Good old-fashioned market competition and bad customer service are the culprits. On the other hand, Bud Light suffered severely due to the boycott of its product. However, my entire motivation was to show the disparity in boycotts today as opposed to in the past. Anheuser-Busch, a subsidiary of AB InBev, owns over 100 beer brands worldwide. These brands span various regions and market segments, including domestic, craft, and international beers. AB InBev is a Belgian conglomerate made of holdings from North America and Europe. So as Americans boycotted Bud Light, they mainly switched to Modelo Especial, owned by AB InBev. Bud Light's sales plummeted by 20%, and Modelo's grew by 10%, ensuring that InBev did not lose market share. Facebook/Meta, on the other hand, capitulated to the public's demands to police itself. Several advertisers helped push FB in the right direction. This lasted about a year. The political winds changed, and so did all of the social workers' policies. Not only did FB rescind all of its most harsh penalties for those not playing nice in the political sandbox, but it also killed all of its DEI initiatives. Boycotts in 2025 look nothing like boycotts in 1965. Also encumbered in this discussion is whether we are doing more harm than good to affected communities. How many certified minority women-owned businesses are affected by today's boycotts with the largest international firms? How many vendors we'd like to support will get caught up in the melee? Can these boycotts last long enough to further a cause? Last, were there more effective tools in the tool case? Or did we choose what we are comfortable with? What tools exist? Forms of consumer protest. Consumer protests are ways individuals and groups express dissatisfaction with a company, industry, or policy. Here are the most common forms. 1. Boycotts. Avoiding a product or company. Refusing to buy from a company puts pressure on it to change policies. Example: the Bud Light boycott 2023 over its partnership with a transgender influencer. 2. Boycotts supporting ethical alternatives. Instead of avoiding a product, consumers deliberately support companies that are aligned with their values. Example: Ben & Jerry's is chosen for its progressive social stance over competitors. 3rd, divestment campaigns, pressuring investors to pull out. Encouraging significant funds, universities, and governments to sell stock holdings in unethical companies. Example: fossil fuel divestment campaigns urging institutions to stop investing in oil and gas. 4. Ethical consumerism, voting with your wallet. Choosing to buy only from companies that meet ethical, environmental, or social standards. Example: supporting fair trade coffee over mass-produced alternatives. 5. Social media campaigns, viral public pressure. Using hashtags, petitions, and viral posts to force companies to respond. Example: Delete Uber, 2017, led to 200,000 users deleting the app. 6. Lawsuits and legal action, challenging companies in court. Filing lawsuits against unethical companies for fraud, discrimination, or environmental damage. Example: lawsuits against Johnson & Johnson over talcum powder cancer risks. 7. Public protests and demonstrations, offline activism, protesting outside corporate offices, stores, or events. Example: Amazon workers strike demanding better wages and conditions. 8. Culture, jamming, and brand sabotage, undermining brand image, using parody, memes, or modified ads to attack a company's reputation. Example: Greenpeace's altered Shell oil ads highlighting environmental damage. While traditional boycotts are less effective today, alternative methods, especially social media pressure and divestment, have gained power in influencing corporate behavior. As an armchair economist, I think the boycott seems to be the least effective tool we can use now regarding finance. However, I do understand the power of a statement and a moment. In biblical terms, David did not have to beat the entire Philistine army. Just one symbolic victory was enough to do the trick. That may be what we will find on February 28th and beyond. Either way, I will be supported by not supporting businesses deemed problematic. Yet I would be remiss if I didn't apply the energy exchange principles to this thought exercise. Relationships. Anything is possible if you gather enough people with the same goal and the desire to see that goal become a reality that can't be achieved. No matter how fruitless a simple boycott can seem, the ensuing desire to create equality cannot fail. Information. The numbers tell me that a boycott with definite end dates and may not correctly lead can never achieve its goals. I see a deeper connection to the underlying information. Perhaps we all learn a little bit more about the frailty of boycotts as but one tool in an ever-expanding toolbox. Maybe we are meant to understand the infinitely more powerful tools of investment and divestment. Sure, we can all agree not to shop on a particular day, but how much leverage can we acquire by changing which stocks are contained in our retirement accounts and 401k plans? We can affect more change as stockholders, which we already are, versus consumers. Knowledge is leverage. What if we all spent just a moment discovering our real leverage as investors? What if we decided to use not one, but every tool in the kit? Money, the ultimate lever. Instead of focusing on where not to spend our money, why not focus on where to invest your money? No matter the outcome, the intent is to give power to the people. In the words of Chairman Fred Hampton, all power to all the people. Please stay tuned to this space for more on improving your life, your community, your relationships, and your access to information.